Good morning, students. Today we are going to discuss about chapter number 1, History, Class-VIII, How, When and Where. So the objective of the chapter is introduce the changing nomenclature of subcontinent and other regions, introduction to new geographical categories, outline of the time frame between 18th and 19th century, and introduction to sources used by historians. Basically, we are going to learn about how our dates, or I can say our history, has been divided into certain periods, that is ancient, medieval and modern, how the nomenclature or the culture of Indian subcontinent has been jotted down and perceived by historians based on the numerous sources. Coming on to the first topic of the chapter, which is how important are dates. Whenever we talk about any historical term, we relate it to the date that this event happened on this particular date, and according to that we draw its consequence and how long that event affects that same thing. How important are dates? Dates help us in finding out how things were in the past and how things change over time. Earlier, history was an account of battles and big events, such as the years of some king was crowned, the year he was married, had a child, the year he fought a particular war or a battle, the year he died. Whenever we quote any ancient ruler or a king who was there belonging to some dynasty, we always say that he lived from this particular year to this particular year. Or for example, when we talk about the Mughal emperors, we talk about that Babur ruled from this year to this year, right? The important thing here is to notice whenever we talk about history, we bring out the dates, we bring out the events that this happened when. So the dates related to the crowning of a king, of a new king, or starting a year of any war or any battle, and the year it ends, it becomes important. The year of the next ruler and succeeded the throne, who comes after whom, it becomes important, and that it gets related to the dates. Now, the concept of the study of the history has changed far more from the time now that it is not important that it is all about dates and all, or the to remember the numbers that which event happened when. It is also important to memorize, to learn, to discuss and understand that what happened and why it happened, the consequences and the actions taken by these important people in the past time. Coming on to which dates become important. This is the subtopic of the first title of the chapter, that is of how date becomes important. This is, we choose to write history around some dates and then those dates become important. This happened because people focus on some major events, for example war, battle, that they believe are important. But with the time, a new set of events might come into focus and new dates become more important. Also, history written by and about British Governor Generals do not give us a correct picture of the status and everyday activity of ordinary Indians. So, history is actually very different for different people, right? The last para, which I just read it out to you all from the slide, it is about that how after the advent of British people into our country, the Governor General who were ruling on the behalf of the British Crown wrote history and made other people write the history, the story of our continent or our subcontinent, India, right? So it is not to believe that whatever they have written in the record is entirely true, because this is something they have written from their perspective, and they have written in such a way that they portray themselves as a superior, as a people who are there in the foreign land to make those people better, right? So the history which is presented by them to the world is not exactly right, and to an extent it can be considered as superficial, which is not entirely true. And the history is more important from the perspective of in ordinary Indian people. If you are talking about the spectrum or broad spectrum of history of the Indian subcontinent. Coming on to How is the past divided in periods? Since we have talked so much about history, it is important before we dwell into the great extent that what is history actually and how we are going to learn it this year, and to be very specific in this chapter. In 1817, James Mill of England, in his book A History of British India, divided the Indian history into three parts: the Hindu period, the Muslim period, and the British period. To improve upon the narrow classification of the Indian historians, usually divided into ancient history, medieval history, and modern history. Before I explain you these three things, it is important to understand James Mill was a Britisher, and he took upon himself of describing the history of Indian subcontinent into his hand. So what he did, that from the very beginning, the ancient history part, he referred it as a Hindu history, since the dynasty over at that time who were ruling and presiding over India were all Hindu dynasty. So he referred this ancient history or ancient time period as Hindu history. I'm just showing you the previous slide, this one, this Hindu period I'm referring to. Then, as you know, that during the after, you can say, the 7th century, or I will be very particular if I say the starting of the Delhi Sultanate period, which you must have learned in class 7th history chapter 3, that how Delhi Sultanate was there, and over the time period, like for let's say 2 to 3 century, it ruled over northern part of our country, and gradually it faced decline and gave rise to the Islamic part, the Mughal Empire, which is here referred as the medieval history. And it is also the time period between the ancient and the modern period. Coming on to, as I have just told you, that medieval history is something which is related to the Muslim period, the Islamic dominance of the dynasties like Mughal Empire and all over our country, India. The next one, which is the last part of the segregation, that is modern history. Modern history is associated with something with the decline of the Mughal Empire, the local regional kingdom uprise, and they couldn't get the momentum of power because already they were superseded and presided by the British people. Since Britishers have started coming into our subcontinent India right from the time of Jahangir, that is the 16th century. So was a matter of time that these Britishers, to be very specific, although the other Europeans were also coming to our subcontinent India, but the Britishers were the more adamant in controlling and having dominant power over the country. So gradually, after the decline of the Mughal Empire and uprising of the regional kingdom, they presided over our country by defeating and accumulating all the petty rulers and regional kingdom into one, and they ruled over. Initially, they ruled over in a form of East India Company, the trading business company, which was established by some handful of people who came to trade from our country. But after the revolt, which you will learn later in the course of class 8th only, that the power from EIC, that is East India Company, was shifted to the British Crown. And that is when the modern history period, or I can say the British period, started in our country. I think that's all for the now today. We are going to recap what we have learned so far. We learned about how important are dates and how people write history, surrounding these dates, only making those dates important, which refer to birth, death of a ruler, crowning of some ruler, or the starting of the battle, or anything else which is related to the some important people. Which date become important? That is what I have just told you. And then how is the past divided in periods? That is ancient